At 8 o'clock, Boris Johnson has announced plans to allow only people into nightclubs in England if they're fully vaccinated. Speaking from Chequers, where he's self-isolating, the Prime Minister has said the rules are due to be brought in at the end of September. Owner of the GAY group of nightclubs, Jeremy Joseph, has told LBC it's a massive blow for an industry trying to rebuild.
We really need the same ruling across the board. Why is it different to go to the theatre, a restaurant or a bar? I mean, I have a bar that has a capacity of 450. What is the difference between my bar, which people will go to first, and then to the nightclub afterwards, which will have different rulings? And what is the definition of a nightclub?
Most children in the UK aren't going to be offered a coronavirus vaccine. The government has announced jabs will be made available for over 12s who are considered vulnerable or live with someone who's immunosuppressed. And an extreme heat weather warning for parts of the UK has been issued for the first time by the Met Office. The amber warning, which is in place until Thursday, covers large parts of Wales, all of the southwest of England and parts of southern and central England. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 163 points at 68.44. The pound buys at $1.36 and €1.15. And the weather, fine, dry and warm in many areas tonight, although it'll be cloudy in some parts of the north, a low of 12 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 1 minute past 8. It's Monday's edition of Cross Question. Joining me on the panel tonight are the Conservative MP Richard Holden. He's MP for North West Durham. Yasmin Qureshi. She is Labour MP for Bolton South East and their international development spokeswoman. Madeline Grant is a columnist on the Telegraph. And Simon Thomas is Chief Executive of London's Hippodrome Casino. So the lines are open now for your questions. 0345 6060 973, and don't forget you can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, the YouTube channel, Facebook feed and Twitter feed. And don't forget also, if you ever miss an edition of Cross Question, it's there on the Cross Question podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast from, and also you can catch up on every edition on the LBC YouTube channel as well. So let's crack on with our first question.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Tim is in Salisbury. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
Hello, what would you like to ask?
Do you think that the vaccine passports is a naked attempt to get people to coerce people to getting vaccines?
Are vaccine passports just a naked attempt to coerce people into getting a vaccine? Well, I suppose, Richard Holden, you can see why Tim might come to that conclusion, because young people aren't going to be allowed into nightclubs unless they've had a vaccine by the end of September.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's what the Prime Minister has been speaking about today. But the truth is that we've already got 2/3 of under 30s who've already had their first jab. I'm in the 30 to 50 category, where just over 80% of us have, and I've got my...
You're a 50 or 30?
Oh, that's very unkind of you, that, Iain, I think. And my second's this weekend. But I think, look, what the Prime Minister is very clear about, and actually you're seeing it in my constituency at the moment, is that what we want to do is see as many people as possible get those jabs, because that's the best way to protect them. And it doesn't only protect them, it protects the rest of society, because we can stop those variants spreading, and those new variants coming through, the more people get vaccinated.
Well, which is all incredibly logical, but to go back to Tim's question, is it effectively an attempt to coerce young people into getting the vaccine?
I certainly
we all
think
know that the uptake among young people hasn't been as high as older people.
It hasn't yet, but we're hoping it will be. And I think, it's a bit of a nudge in that direction.
A nudge rather than coercion.
I think a bit of a nudge.
You've got a cheeky little glint in your eye there, if I may say so.
Well, I think it's definitely a nudge. I think we want people to get vaccinated. I think we're trying to nudge them at the moment, and I think, a bit of a nudge at this moment in time is not a bad thing.
Madeline Grant, what are Telegraph readers going to say about this, do you think?
I suspect, I can't speak for all of our readers, but I suspect a lot of them will say that we've past the era of nudging some time ago, and we're into the realm of shoving very hard. I mean, I think this very much is an attempt to push or coerce young people in particular into getting vaccinated. I think it's the PM and his team have perhaps seen what's happening in France, where Emmanuel Macron has kind of raised the threat of exclusion from everyday activities and has seen people registering for their vaccines shooting up. To me, it's quite, I think, evidence that it is coercive rather than simply about reduced transmission rates, is the fact that for entering a nightclub, not even a negative test will be deemed sufficient to get you into the event. That suggests there is something much more coercive and ideological going on than simply this kind of innocent nudge economics that we've got used to over the years.
Yasmin Qureshi, the question is, are vaccine passports just a naked attempt to coerce people into getting a vaccine? And you can kind of see the logic, I suppose, of the question. But why just nightclubs? I mean, if you do it for nightclubs, wouldn't there be other areas of the economy that maybe you would want to do this?
Well, I think if we're going to have vaccine passports, then I think they should be for across the board, whether it's nightclubs, whether it's travelling abroad. I think we've seen, haven't they, that if you have more people are vaccinated, there are less transmissions rates, and also if you do become unwell, then you don't feel the illness as strongly if you're not vaccinated. So I think there's all sensible reasons for doing so. And I think if you're going to have vaccine passport for nightclubs, then they should be for going on holidays and other events where there's a lot of people together. My only concern about these is that there are people who genuinely, for medical reasons and other reasons, can't have vaccinations. And there are people who certainly, won't have it for a number of different reasons, not because they kind of are anti-vaccination, but because they can't. And I wouldn't want them to be in a position where their travel and life is affected. So I don't know, maybe there needs to be some kind of, I don't know how you do it, some kind of clause or someone to be able to show why they've not had the vaccination, but they should still be able to have the passport. So I know it sounds a bit contradictory, but I know I've had some people, constituents, write to me saying, I want to be able to travel. Do I have to have vaccine passport? It doesn't seem really unfair. They've given a reason. Some have been on health issues. So I think there should be some exceptions. Okay. But otherwise, I think it kind of makes sense to me to have them.
Simon, you run the Hippodrome Casino. How many people do you, on average, have through your doors every day?
At the moment, about 2,000 people a day.
That's a hell of a lot, isn't it?
Yeah,
and okay, it's quite. You've got a big establishment there. Yeah. But that you could argue that, well, if they're doing it for nightclubs, they ought to do it for casinos as well.
Yeah, but
or do you not wish me to raise that prospect?
No, I think it's definitely worth airing. The Hippodrome's huge. It's 75,000 square feet, so it doesn't meet the crowded and close type concerns. But clearly, it's either incentivizing or bullying people to get a passport, and it just depends where it ends up.
To get a vaccine, you mean?
To get a vaccine passport. Yeah, sorry, starting off with the nightclubs, it's pretty inevitable, but there's a real spectrum of nightclubs, and there's a pub spectrum that overlaps dramatically, and other clubs, restaurants, and all of the other venues. So you start with one. Logically, you've got to do with everybody or none. And then if you do everybody putting a West End business hat on, as the amount of foreigners and the issues we will have when the foreigners' passport actually works in this country, and it just raises so many questions. And I'd love to have all the solutions, but clearly that's up to the government. But we need to get them.
Because it's interesting that they announced this to everybody's surprise today. Because before they'd said, well, it's really up to businesses to decide what to do. If you run a business and you want to say, well, you need to show evidence of being vaccinated, that's up to you. But Richard Holden, do you think this is the start of a bit of a slippery slope here, that the government's already accused by many people of being far too restrictive, far too dictatorial in a lot of the lockdown restrictions? This will just add to that narrative, won't it?
I don't think anybody is particularly saying the government's dictatorial at the moment. I mean,
do you not look at Twitter?
Well, I do, but I wouldn't say that's a good arbiter of public opinion across the board. I do. I was a bit concerned, actually, by just what Yasmin said, which is we need to introduce vaccine passports across the board. That is something I think would be a really draconian step, and something that we need to do really avoid. I don't want to see it in place for things like access to NHS services or universities or things like that. I think that would be. I
don't think that's what she was meaning, but I mean, like football matches, sporting events. restaurants, cinemas, theatres. I mean, you can make an argument for all of those. If you believe that they're right for nightclubs, you could surely make an argument that all of those establishments ought to be using them as well.
I think we all are aware that nightclubs are a different sort of venue where people are incredibly close to each other in an incredibly confined space as well.
Well, that's the aim at the start of the evening.
Well, I mean, it doesn't always work out like that. I've not been out with you yet.
Tell me about it.
But us two alone in the corner at the end of the evening. Yes, maybe. No, but I think there's quite a clear difference there between nightclubs and other sort of events and that sort of thing. Also, you're in a very enclosed, often public space there. Which is very different to us, large, airy sort of venues, or which is I think there's another element to that.
And that's a really interesting aspect of this. I'd recommend everyone reads Libby Purvis's article in the Times this morning, where she was essentially saying we need to take the advice of Florence Nightingale on this, who was all about ventilation. You've got to have fresh air, and we've got to a point now where if you go to a modern hotel, all of the windows are sealed. You don't get any natural ventilation. And that's the same in a lot of other establishments as well. It's a really compelling read. I don't think we've really sort of thought about this enough. Yasmin, do you just want to come back on what Richard was saying there?
Yeah, I mean, I think passports are a good idea, but equality, and I think, Richard, you're wrong when I was saying about going to hospitals and requiring passport. No, I agree with what Iain was saying, which is that if you're going to have it for nightclubs, then I think you might need to have it for pubs. And I've had constituents like to me saying, well, look, they can all do this, right, but I can't go and watch my son, doing his football practice or something. So I think that we do need to have a parity of the rules. Obviously, there are situations where we don't need to have vaccination passport certificates. But the other thing that concerns me, and I heard this on the news just before I was coming on to your programme about these rules. I mean, I think I read something about the fact that from September onward, if you went somewhere, you've got to have been, I think, double vaccinated or something. You can't go in. And I'm thinking, if you're going to have these rules, why not have them right today? So everybody knew we were opening up today. So if there were going to be rules regarding vaccinations, passports, or lateral flow test, or other things, right, why didn't we have those in place? So very clearly set out. And I agree with you about the ventilation, which, about what Florence Nightingale said. We need ventilations. We also, I think, people still need to be sensible and, continue to wear masks. And I think people still should try to be sensible and keep social distance. I know I will be doing those. I'll be trying to practice those, and I hope that other people will as well. Because I think there's still I think people think that somehow just because now we're out, that means everything is solved. It isn't, because infection rates are going up. And already the hospitalisation rates are going up as well. So I think that, we need to still continue to be more responsible, even though the lockdown is sort of eased off.
Okay, Yasmin, thank you very much for that. Danny on Twitter says, Iain, stop flirting. You see, I flirt when I don't even know I'm doing it. You're listening to LBC's Cross Question. It's 13 minutes past 8.
LBC.
This
8:15. You're listening to or watching Cross Question on LBC. Richard Holden is here, Conservative MP for North West Durham. Yasmin Qureshi is Labour MP for Bolton South East and International Development spokeswoman. Madeline Grant is a Telegraph columnist, and Simon Thomas is Chief Executive of London's Hippodrome Casino. Let's go have a text question from Tina in Wimbledon. What the hell was Boris Johnson thinking of trying to avoid self-isolation? Madeline Grant, can you explain it?
Well, I mean, he didn't avoid it for very long. In the face of public pressure, we saw a very characteristic pivot from number 10. But I think, on what we saw initially was an attempt for the government for different rules to apply to the people who are making the rules, which we've seen a number of times during the pandemic, and which is completely unacceptable. And yet, despite the public outrage in the face of multiple examples of rank hypocrisy from number 10 and from ministers and MPs on all sides, actually, that they don't really seem to get just how angry the public are about this. The fact that they didn't immediately see the way this would appear to the general public, and that they initially went through with that decision before flip-flopping eventually, I think suggests that there is a real kind of tone deafness with public opinion. I noticed that in lots of my WhatsApp groups with friends who don't follow politics as closely as I do, they were really angry, like really, really angry. Immediately, the messages started flooding through, and I'm not sure that the government is well, I think perhaps they're aware of it now, but they always seem to be playing catch up with the public mood rather than reacting to it quickly.
Yasmin Qureshi, I'm tempted to say, here's an open goal. Do you want to kick the ball?
Certainly I will. I think it was the shortest U-turn I think the government has done. I think 2 hours and 38 minutes, something. 8 o'clock they said they were going to apply the pilot scheme, and then about 2 hours and 38 minutes later they said, sorry, we'll go back to doing... I mean, you know what it is? It's arrogance of this government. They've been in power now for so long, and you've got an 80 majority. So I think they feel as if they can say whatever they like, have two sets of standards, and the amount of hypocrisy, and not just in relation to this, it's, whether it's the contract they've been awarded in the manner they've been awarded, the whole flip-flopping of rules. I mean, you have one set of rules operating, then you've got another set a few days later, then you have, lockdowns in regions without anyone being told that they're going to be in a lockdown. I think this government really, I think they are above the rules. They believe they're above the rules.
Let me play devil's advocate here, and I don't believe a word of what I'm about to say. But that he is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak is the Chancellor. They've tested negative, as I understand it, for coronavirus. Should we not cut them a bit of slack, given that they are the people running the country? Do they not deserve a bit of understanding because of that?
No, actually, I think as politicians, they're probably, and as we are all held to a higher standard than everybody else. And if we're going to be if we're asking people to do things, we have to set an example. I know that when I go out, when I go out on a street, I'm walking and somebody, is rude to me or something, I'm very quiet. I say nothing. Why? Because as a member of parliament, I don't feel I can be sort of answer them back in a way that perhaps if I wasn't an MP, I could, because I have to set, it might be unfair, you could say, but I mean, I try to set different standards. And I think as Prime Minister and as Chancellor, they need to lead from the top, because if they lead from the top, others will follow.
OK. Simon?
Bluntly, I think it's ridiculous that our country's leader is having to self-isolate at a time of high stress like this, when he's double jabbed and has very, very publicly had COVID. And I think it's a further reason that the 16th of August date should be pulled back. The pinging that's going on.
Just explain what you mean. Why is 16th of August important?
Because at the moment, if you are pinged or told to self-isolate, and yet you have been double jabbed, you have to follow the rule. But if you're double jabbed after the 16th of August, you don't have to follow the rule. And we're being told double jabbing is going to be required to go to a nightclub, but double jabbing isn't good enough to stop our country's leader having to self-isolate. It just kind of seems to be very mixed messages on it.
Richard Holden, how sorry do you feel for Robert Jenrick, who was thrown under the bus on this yesterday, wasn't he? He was doing the Sunday rounds, did interviews with Andrew Marr, Sophie Reed, or Trevor Phillips, I think it is now, and then suddenly everything he said turned out to be wrong when he was defending the two of them not self-isolating, and then they announced that they were going to shambles.
Well, look, Robert's the cabinet minister. I think that sort of comes with the job. That's just the way it is. I'm glad that the government's changing the rules at the moment on critical workers, so that we're going to bring it forwards from the 16th of August. I think that's a sensible change. But yeah, I think that the right decision has been arrived at in the end.
But you've worked in government. You're a special advisor. You specialised in communications. I can't imagine that if you had been in Number 10. Advising Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak on what to do, I can't believe that alarm bells wouldn't have rung in your head over their initial decision. There must be people in Number 10 who, either the Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak didn't think about what the consequences could be and didn't see the sort of Barnard Castle comparison, sort of one rule for them, one rule for us, or they didn't take the advice of their advisors. What do you think it is?
I have no idea, but I think you're right. I think this was I think what I'm really glad is that it changed swiftly, because I don't think it was the right approach, and I'm glad that it changed really quickly, and I think it's been the right decision in the end.
Okay, let's go to another call from Chris in Croydon. Hello, Chris. What would you like to ask?
Oh, good evening, Gil. Good evening, panel. Yes, look, you've had a lot of people sniping at our government. My point is, the fault really lies with the Chinese government. And my question is, when this pandemic is over, the recriminations are going to begin. Should China be held to account? And if so, how? I'm not talking about necessarily the origin of the virus, but I am talking about its willful concealment at the start. Thank you.
Okay, interesting question. I mean, the virus obviously did originate in China. Yasmin Qureshi, is this something that people aren't really thinking about much now, but maybe in a few months' time we will all need to?
Well, I think, as I understand it, there's a thought about setting up an inquiry, and I think looking into as to obviously not just the origination, but what actions did China take or not take. At the moment, we know we've been hearing all these things about they concealed, they didn't tell enough information, or people said the WHO were corrupt or they didn't investigate properly. But I mean, I don't want to go down to that because I don't know what the facts are. At the moment, it's all speculations as to what China did or didn't do, or what WHO did or didn't do. I think what it does, however, requires it. I think if there is evidence to suggest that there has been, that a government lied or concealed information, then I think an international body should investigate and find out if what these speculations are correct or not. And I think it's important to find out if this is actually accurate as opposed
to... Just to sort of play along with the question, if it does turn out that it is proved that China did conceal it for a time and that it did originate in China, and China's lack of action help spread it around the world, do you not think there ought to be consequences for China?
Well, I think the international community, yes, they do need to deal with the issue. Then what happens, whether there's a what kind of, I don't know, do they ask for financial compensation, or do they ask for an apology, or what do they do? I think, yeah, but I think first we need to, find out what has happened. Of course, there's a practical issue about holding states to accountability for anything these days. I mean, most countries in the world, especially the powerful countries, they can do more or less what they like and completely get away with it. I mean, the pandemic is China, if they're saying concealment, but there's other conflicts going on in the world, like Afghanistan, etc., and others, where, I mean, we can run through so many things about other countries where states have done. So there is the other issue internationally: how do you hold a state to account? And at the moment, the international framework for holding any state to account is actually pretty negligible.
Simon.
Way out of my understanding, but I would just
That's
love...
the peril of coming on this programme,
I know, it's fun though. But and also having an awful lot of Chinese customers, I'm not going to say derogatory.
Actually, that is very true, isn't it? You do.
But
Shall I move on to Richard?
but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of lessons learned. I'd just love to get all of this COVID nonsense behind us so we can actually...
Do you think we'll ever know the truth, though? Because there are some things where even 50, 100 years later, you're still not 100% sure what happened.
I'm sure we won't. And there'll be lots of truths as well and different versions and interpretations of it. But I'd like to get the whole thing behind us and have a sensible inquiry into it and see what we can learn to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Richard, I mean, obviously China's in the news today with the government holding them to their account over cyber attacks on Microsoft and all sorts of different computers. But, I mean, on this, Yasmin is right, isn't she, that even if there is irrefutable evidence that they did conceal the pandemic at the time, there's nothing that anyone can do about it.
I think, we've got to take a lot of what any incredibly autocratic or dictatorial regime says with a massive pinch of salt. I did disagree with Yasmin somewhat on the idea of the equivalence between the United States, which is a free and open and democratic society, and the one-party state, which is China. I did think that was a bit of a strange argument to make from a shadow minister. But no, I think there's quite clearly...
I'll come back to you, Yasmin, in a minute.
I think there's quite clearly a real concern over the attitude of the Chinese government, what they knew and when. And I think we do need to find out some of that, because we saw it with the Soviet Union over Chernobyl back in the day. There are real disasters that happen in some of these regimes, and what they do is they put the survival of the regime above everything else. And I think that is a real danger when you are dealing with incredibly powerful countries in the modern world like China.
Madeline, it is really difficult to hold countries like China or indeed Russia to account. We think back to the Skripal affair back in 2018. I've just been reading about that in Alan Duncan's diaries, and it just made me think, well, who has been held to account for that? Very strong words spoken at the time, diplomats expelled, sanctions imposed, but in the wider scheme of things, we might as well have really not bothered, because it has had no effect on Russia whatsoever.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think the key reason for that is that there are some things that we can do without putting boots on the ground, but there is a limited number of tools available to us. I would argue that we could have done more to freeze assets and make life more difficult for often the kind of corrupt money that has entered this country. We should have been harder on that. But on the whole, there is not an appetite for military intervention, and to make a real difference to countries like, for example, Russia and its actions on the Crimea, it will require greater muscle than what the West is currently willing to do, which is the sad truth of it. On the point about China, I mean, I think your speaker's, the question was absolutely right, that we have been perhaps too critical of our government and not thinking about where this really began. It began with China, and I suppose that equally part of the criticism of the government is that at times it seems as if they are kind of behaving like China to get us out of the mess that we're in, rather than looking for alternative solutions. And things like vaccine passports represent a move towards, greater sort of surveillance state in a papers, please society that doesn't feel very British. But I do take that point. In terms of what can we do, again, I'd say that's beyond my expertise, beyond most people's expertise. But I would say that we need to firstly take seriously and properly investigate the lab leak hypothesis, which was kind of scornfully dismissed as a crackpot conspiracy theory by all sorts of experts in the great and the good for a long time. And then it's only recently that more credible evidence is emerging that suggests that it should have been properly investigated and looked at. And more broadly, I think we need to work very hard at sort of forming a coalition of friendly nations around the world, working out how we can try to reorient our supply chain so that we're less dependent on China. And also, I think we need to do more around the globe to push back on. Right now, for example, China is sending its vaccine all around the world. A vaccine that's not as effective as ours. We need to get there first and be the first to vaccinate many countries. They're very good at expanding their soft power in all sorts of areas. And again, perhaps because we've moved away from looking at the global stage, we haven't been so good at that.
Yasmin, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, on the point about saying, of course, USA is different to China, but I don't think anybody with a hand on their heart can say that USA have not made some colossal international mistakes, which has led to, thousands and thousands of people dying and destructions of countries. So you can't say that. My point was that whether it's USA, whether it's China, big, powerful country, it's very difficult to do anything about them internationally. You can't put boots on the ground because they are, militarily just as superior, if not more than many other countries. I mean, there is some international law does exist. So, for example, if a state commits an offence, in which case here China, another state could take them to the International Court of Justice and sue them for, for negligence or concealment, which is part of negligence. So there's those options possible, but they're long and very protracted routes. Okay. But I think it's right that the government is. But I think if I respectfully disagree with the caller in the sense that we should rightly criticise our government because they have made colossal failure. They've been given a pandemic, and we understand that it's difficult to deal with it. But there's been so many inconsistencies, so many on-score goals, which I think if people had been thinking properly, they wouldn't have made those mistakes.
Okay, Richard, very quickly.
No, I just wanted to come back, and I just wanted to say I agree with a lot of what Maddie said. Actually, I think we have to. The USSR wasn't embedded in the global economy like the Chinese are today. I think we really do need to look at that. A lot of what Britain's doing internationally, whether it's CPTPP, that sort of new. Trying to diversify our supply chain. I think those are really important things that we need to do now because China is an autocratic regime which is totally embedded in the supply for all the rest of the world, and we really need to have a look at that and what we can do there to change that over the next few years.
Quick text here from somebody who doesn't give their name. Russia invaded and annexed a whole country. The world did nothing. You are correct. No action could be taken against China on COVID. Great question, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973. Every single question on my board at the moment is about COVID. Wouldn't mind having one in the programme that wasn't. So if you've got something that you want to ask our panel, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:32 News Headlines with Dominic Ellis.
People who want to go to nightclubs in England will have to prove they're fully vaccinated against coronavirus in order to get in. The rules are to be introduced at the end of September. Children aged 12 and over who are clinically vulnerable or living with adults who are immunosuppressed are going to be offered a COVID jab. It means most teenagers won't be getting a vaccine. And the Met Office's first ever extreme heat warning has been issued as parts of the UK are set to reach 33 degrees Celsius. The warning, which covers a large part of Wales, all of the southwest of England and parts of southern and central England, will remain in place until the end of Thursday. And the weather, fine, dry and warm in many areas overnight tonight, although it will be cloudy in some parts of the north, a low of 12 degrees.
This is LBC.
6 on LBC, you're listening to Cross Question, or hopefully watching Cross Question as well. We have Richard Holden, Yasmin Qureshi, Madeline Grant and Simon Thomas with us. Our next question comes from my favourite port city in Belgium, Antwerp, from Tricia. Hello, Tricia.
Oh, hello, Ian. Thank you. Hello, panel. Yeah, I'd like to know what everybody thinks about Colin Pitchfork not being on the sexual criminal list and just being able to live where he likes and nobody knows where he is.
There's an allied text question to this from Julian Suffolk, who says, can you please ask your guest whether double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork should, 1, be released and 2, be kept off the sex offenders register because his offence was too long ago? Yasmin Qureshi, let's start with you.
Right, okay. So sexual offend, I think everybody should be on sexual offenders list, and I think, the rules exist and I think they should be there. On the question of the...
But the point is he committed his offence before this register was compiled. I think that's the argument that's being used by people to say that, no, he shouldn't be on it.
Oh, sorry, I thought they were trying to say that perhaps... okay, well, I'm one of those people, I don't believe in retrospective legislation and retrospective criminal punishments, because registering yourself on a sex offenders list is a form of punishment, and the courts use it as a form of punishment. And I think that we shouldn't have retrospectivity in terms of criminal justice system in criminal law and punishment. So I'm a very firm believer in that. But secondly, on the issue of whether he should never be released, I, as a barrister and former prosecutor, actually have kind of looked at some of these cases which have gone before probation service to decide whether people should be released. And I think all I would say is that individual facts of the case will determine whether anybody is given parole or probation or released. And I think, I find it hard to believe that somebody who's been convicted of double murders and double rape is going to be released. To me, that sounds kind of implausible. But I don't know. I normally, maybe because I am also a barrister by profession, that I tend not to want to be involved in how the probation, the parole board. Sorry, the parole board. I know they take expert evidence from everyone. They get reports, psychiatrist reports, prison reports. They look at the fact of the crime as well, what actually happened in the facts, what was happening. And I don't think the parole board makes decisions lightly. So I think,
okay,
in our law, they are the body to make that decision. I think they should be allowed to do so.
Simon, this is always the problem with these cases, is that you read some of the newspaper reports and you think, well, it's outrageous that person should ever be allowed out. But none of the 5 of us in this conversation we don't know the full facts. And I suppose we have to bear that in mind as well when coming to these kind of judgments.
Yeah, we can't make a judgment, but I'd certainly be on the end of the spectrum of throw away the key for people.
Yeah, me too.
Really that horrible.
And it's understandable, isn't it? Because if somebody has committed a double rape and murder, it's difficult, from my point of view, Richard Holden, to understand how somebody like that can be rehabilitated. But clearly the parole board think that he has been.
Well, I'm afraid I totally agree with you on this, Ian, and I actually really strongly disagree with Yasmin. One of my colleagues, Alberto Costa, this is one of his constituency cases. He's been fighting this for the family incredibly hard. Families of the actually 2 girls who were raped and murdered by him. I find it astonishing that because the legislation cannot ensure that somebody is on the sex offenders register retrospectively. I genuinely think that's crazy. I don't think it's a punishment when it's something there to protect people as well. I'm afraid I'm afraid I'm on the very much the, for somebody who's committed this sort of heinous crime, then I don't think these people should be getting out of prison.
Madeline, he didn't get a whole life sentence. Obviously, I suspect that most of us would have quite happily doled that out to him. But where do you stand on this?
I stand very much with you and Richard. And I think that this is, that from my understanding, they're according to a legal loophole that is basically they're going on the assumption that because his crimes and sentencing were before 1997, that somehow the usual rules don't apply. But I'm afraid that if someone can rape and murder 2 teenagers, they've very much proven that they don't have a conscience, that they are probably unredeemable, and that they should never be released into a vulnerable public. And I just think that the parole board members who okayed this, that they have a responsibility to the public. And, if he were to reoffend, and of course we very much hope that he doesn't, would we ever learn about the parole board and would they name themselves to the public? It's one of these issues where I don't understand it. And I do take Yasmin's point about not doing things in that retroactive way. But I think some things are more important. This is clearly a terrible case that has gone through some kind of loophole, and that we ought to do whatever it takes to amend that rather than the alternative, which to me is horrifying.
Tricia?
Can I just clarify that the laws regarding punishments for rapes and murders has been the same even pre-97 as it is now. There's always been the possibility of life imprisonment for these offences for a very long time in the English domestic criminal law. So that's not unusual. So there's nothing wrong. The law hasn't been changed. On the sexual offenders register, it is correct that, pre-97. But you see, if we start, in a bad case, start changing the rules, our judicial system is based on the system, right? That people, when they commit an offence, they must know. Not that they necessarily need to know, or they would, but they need to be aware what the laws are. And you can't, therefore, just kind of change it, because then it could be used in other circumstances as well, because people can find just as possible good example. And I think then you're on a slippery slope. Onto the parole board, as I said, I don't know, sometimes we don't know what the facts are. And I'll give you an example from my life when I was a prosecutor. There was a young man who, when I was reading the summary, he'd been charged with arson. When you actually found out what had happened, he was in a care home. He'd gone to court to give evidence against his stepfather, who had been raping and abusing his little sister. When he arrived at the court, his mother saw him and gave him a punch in his stomach. He started crying. He came home and he set fire to the curtain. Then he realized what was happening and he brought the fire down. Now, on the face of it, that's arson. And you would think, oh my God, why should he be, given a lenient sentence? But, sometimes we need to, I'm not saying, please, I hope people understand. I'm not trying to say there's any excuse or any justification for anything. But I'm just saying that we don't know what the full facts are, that's all. But I think it's right also for the MP to fight against it, because obviously people are human. They can make an error. Probation board can make an error. People can make errors. And I think, therefore, a system of reviewing their decision and campaigning, that's perfectly correct as well.
Okay. Richard, you are gagging to get in.
So I just think that, I think, this case was extensively covered. This man raped and murdered on 2 separate occasions, I think about, over a year apart, 2 young women. The idea that he shouldn't even be on the sex offenders register and that can't be put retrospectively, I just find absolutely astonishing. And I just find Yasmin's position on this absolutely crazy. I think it would also leave people at risk, and I totally support my colleague Alberto Costa's campaign.
Tricia, your view, please.
Yeah, I feel quite passionate because as a little girl of 7 years old, having been sexually abused by a stranger, and I actually come from Leicester, but a different period, that as far as I'm concerned, paedophiles don't change, and the world is in danger with this man being on the street.
Well, I think you've got a lot of sympathy from people on this panel. Yasmin, quick final word.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as everybody's known since 1997, right, that the laws have changed. There are many people, there are many other people in his case, and everybody's known this since 1997. If we want to do this, then what we need to do is Parliament just needs to pass legislation. And if they can say, look, forget about retrospective legislation. We're going to pass laws saying that this is what we can do. And if they want to do, that's a different story, and they can do that. But everybody's known since 1997, and he's not the only person.
Okay. Yasmin, we're going to have to leave it there because I want to fit in a couple more questions before we end. Thank you very much indeed. Tricia, thank you for phoning in as well. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. Welcome to the show.
9 on LBC. I'm going to ask my panel to be slightly less loquacious on their answers to the next question. Then we can fit in 2 before 9. Richard Holden, Yasmin Qureshi, Madeline Grant and Simon Thomas with us taking your calls. And indeed text, because this is a text from Margaret in Stoke Newington. Prince Harry is going to write a memoir sharing the highs and lows of his life so far. Why would anyone be interested in reading this tripe, says Margaret, in a very dispassionate and objective question, Simon?
Well, I won't be reading it, but I'm sure it'll be a bestseller in the States and he'll make a shed load of money out of it.
I think it'll be a bestseller here as well.
Yeah.
Well, not in my house, but I'm sure you're right.
Why wouldn't you be interested? I mean, he's led an interesting life, hasn't he, one way or another?
He has. To be honest, I've got so much respect for the Queen. I think she's been so gracious. I don't want to put any airtime into how he has been behaving.
Richard?
I'm afraid I'm 100% with Simon on this one. I think we've heard quite enough from Prince Harry and Meghan recently. And I 100% with Simon on his views about the Queen as well. I think she's been her and actually the rest of the royal family have been very dignified in the way that they've dealt with a very difficult situation, with him deciding to leave and go to America, and I certainly won't be.
What do you think the motivation is?
Well, I mean, you've got to. They've just done a massive deal with Netflix, haven't they? I fear that there's a financial motivation there. I think actually, the truth was Prince Harry and Prince William did quite a lot of good work, particularly around the Invictus Games and around mental health. But I think unfortunately he's thrown so much of that brilliant goodwill which he'd built up with so much of the British public away by the way he's behaved in recent years.
Madeline.
Yes, I feel like not a day goes by when we don't have the latest instalment in the Sussex's crusade for greater privacy, and this is just the latest. I think that's the thing that I find kind of unfair about these repeated pronouncements is that however heartfelt, however genuine, it's very much their version of events, his or the Duchess of Sussex's, when they gave their interview to Oprah Winfrey. And because of the nature of the palace protocol, because of the nature of the royal family, they're not able to give their side of events in exchange. And the fact that we keep hearing this one-sided narrative, I think, is rather unfair, because the royal family can't possibly counteract in the same way that they can say whatever they like. And so I agree, it will be a bestseller, but I personally will try to avoid it, although there's a high likelihood that the Telegraph will, employ me or someone else to do a hatchet review of it. So let's see how that goes.
Well, we don't know what's in it, Yasmin, but I'm sure the papers will be full of it tomorrow. Is it something that you will be reading?
Well, I won't be reading the papers about it, I can assure you. But I think I would be being dishonest if I said that if the memoirs was written and somebody gave me the book, I would probably read it. But I mean,
you wouldn't part with your own money?
I wouldn't part. But yeah.
Typical MP after a freebie. OK, well, they're very brief answers. I can't ask Margaret what her... in fact, I think we know what she would say, seeing as she described it as tripe. Let's move on to Mark in Chelsea. Mark, hello, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Ian. I'd just like to say to your board that are on there now, are they going to carry on wearing their masks? Because there's only one other quick question I'd like to say. We've had so many people... I work in a supermarket in Chelsea... And we've had the young people, middle-aged people and old people, they've carried on wearing their masks. So it's not Freedom Day. Everyone's respected it and they've carried on wearing it. Are they going to stop wearing theirs or are they going to carry on wearing it?
Well, let's go around the panel. Mask has been one of these culture war dividing issues, I think, over the past week or so. Richard, are you still going to continue to wear a mask?
Well, I nipped down to my local Sainsbury's here today, and I was wearing my mask when I was inside. I think if I'm taking the late train and there's nobody else in the carriage back up to the northeast, I won't be wearing it, but if I'm on the tube, I will be. I think it's just about people being responsible and thinking about others as well.
So, did you say you're not going to wear it on the train?
I think if I'm on my own on the last train, then I think that's one thing. But I think on a crowded tube carriage...
After you visit to a nightclub?
Only with you, Ian. We established that earlier on.
That's not going to happen. Madeline?
I think it'll, similarly to Richard, it would be conditional on the occasion, which in a way, I think is the way we should be going forward. I completely disagree with people who are outraged that mask mandates haven't remained the kind of official government guidance, and it's been now passed on to venues and increasingly to individuals. I think that's the right way forward. I mean, cases are rising in this country at the moment, so it seems rational that people might wear them in crowded spaces, but having seen people wearing them even out of doors today, that kind of worries me, because that feels very out of proportion to the level of risk and all the things that we know about this virus. And I do worry. I share the concerns of your caller, who's concerned that for some people this will continue. I mean, now that the onus has been taken away somewhat, not entirely from the government and put onto the individual, it's kind of up to us when we want to end this completely. And right now the public are being pretty cautious. But in a way that vindicates those people who are arguing that actually the public could be trusted to make personal responsibility, that they could be cautious, because there has been this idea throughout that we were too stupid to do that. We needed official government guidance on everything. And so I think that has been well and truly scorched.
Sorry, I was going to cough there. Yasmin, your views on masks?
Okay. Well, firstly, I have to say, I thought it was a very false war about this, people who should be wearing masks, or people saying it always goes against our liberty to put a mask on. I mean, I think people should grow up, right? In parts of the world where they have a lot of health issues, people wear masks quite regularly, and it's quite a common thing done to protect themselves and other people. And so I think people should have had a grown-up approach to this in the first place. Now, in relation to the mask, I went to the shops today on a couple of occasions. I did keep my mask on when I went in, and I will continue. And I feel like, I have to say, not often I agree with the Conservative members of Parliament, but I kind of do agree along the lines of, if I'm on a train and there's nobody there and it's only myself, then I might take the mask off. But if it's even slightly crowded, there's people there, I would keep my mask on. And I think, we should just exercise some common sense about this, because there are people who've got autoimmune issues, who pick up bugs very quickly.
Be careful though, Yasmin, because we know where CCTV can lead, don't we? And there's CCTV on trains. You just get somebody working for a train company say, this Labour MP wasn't wearing a mask. It's outrageous. But I think, Simon, what's your view on this? Because obviously you run an establishment. Are you expecting all of your customers to wear masks still?
I actually had a walk through this evening, just in case this question came up, and about half the customers weren't wearing them. We've just made it optional. I think particularly the vulnerable and the unvaccinated should wear them. But I've had COVID. I'm double jabbed. I feel I'm no threat to anybody. And so I will very much be ditching the mask whenever I can. If I'm in a situation where it makes other people feel comfortable or more comfortable, I may be more minded to wear them. I think the question on the mask really is, what is the point of them? Are they actually effective? The WHO and Public Health both said they were fairly low effectiveness. And when you see most people wearing them with the nose sticking out or around
they're not going to be effective if you don't cover your nose or your mouth. But I think the scientific evidence is now fairly conclusive that they do reduce the risk. Then they'll never eliminate it. That is certainly true. I have to say, my anecdotal evidence today is I haven't seen any difference in mask wearing at all. I think you cannot judge things by social media, and if you judge things by social media, nobody would be wearing a mask today, but they are, and in my view, a good thing too. Final text question. Actually, before we come to that, let me tell you who's on Cross Question tomorrow. We have the Labour MP Navendu Mishra, we have Conservative MP Pauline Latham, Joe Harris, who's leader of the Lib Dems on the Local Government Association, and the political commentator Jonathan Liss. Now, text question from James in Hartlepool. Extreme heat across the UK. How does the panel recommend I sleep when my bedroom is like a sauna? OK, that's an interesting one. Madeline, can you give some agony aunt advice to James in Hartlepool?
Well, I had a really bad night's sleep last night because I'm visiting my family at the moment, and the bedroom is north facing, and it was woken up by a big burst of
lovely
sunlight.
Wallpaper, by the way.
Oh, thank you. But in general, I find the best way to get to sleep is to find a really boring book, like ideally long, 800 pages, Victorian, really boring. Find a really boring Dickens.
I can supply one of those. The Prime Ministers would do the trick.
Yes. Yes. that too.
Yasmin, what's your secret for sleeping in heat?
Oh, well, I put the fan on. That's always a very good practical thing. Open the windows and throw off the duvet. And then, just put some cool sheet on, and that's it. I find that quite works most of the time.
I don't bother with the sheet personally, but Simon?
I'm with the ladies here. Thin sheet, nice fan, and just following up on the book thing, I think maybe Harry's memoir actually have a use after all.
Very good. Richard?
No, I think we're all in violent agreement on this one. I think, open the windows if you can, and a little bit of air in. Definitely no duvet at this time of year.
And can I recommend not to allow two dogs to sleep on your bed like I do? Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Yasmin Qureshi, Madeline Grant, Richard Holden and Simon Thomas. Join us again for Cross Question tomorrow again at 8. In the next hour, I want to get your reaction to this so-called, and I hate to use the phrase because I said I wouldn't use it on the programme, Freedom Day. It was a phrase coined by the tabloid newspapers. I don't think the Prime Minister ever used it, but I may be wrong on that. What differences have you noticed on Freedom Day? And I want to get your reaction to this announcement today that you will need to have effectively a vaccine passport to get into a nightclub after the end of September. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Boris Johnson has announced plans to only allow people into nightclubs in England if they're fully vaccinated. Speaking from Chequers, where he's